Hey guys, welcome back. And as promised, I've said in previous videos I was going to do more variety of content. So from that initial sound clip in the beginning, post a comment right now with your guess what you think the car is that I bought. While you do that, I'll tell you a quick story how I even ended up in this situation in the first place. So a little while back, before COVID and all this madness started, I was in the market and looking at something fun that I could take to an autocross or a track day, but also be able to take it to the mountains, put the top down, have some fun. Most people, the answer is always the Miata. Now, I've liked the Miata, I've driven them, but it's just not a car that I ever envisioned or wanted to purchase. So the obvious alternative to that was a Porsche Boxster. So in whatever was March of 2020, I was looking at Boxsters and test drove a S is a 04 model, and at the time they were hanging out around 10 to 12 grand for a pretty decent one. Now, because this COVID thing was looming, I decided to back out of it and not purchase one, which turned out to be kind of a good idea because of the financial slump we all found ourselves in. But then at the same time, it would have been a hell of an investment because nowadays they're fetching 15 grand plus, so they have immensely gone up in value, and now you're talking about 2 years later. Again, that itch started coming over me in the last few months. I always, for fun, just sit there and spend time looking at cars online on Auto Tempest or whatever else it may be, just probably like most of you do as well. And as I was looking at Boxsters and getting disappointed with the sheer dollar amount people were asking for, I started looking for other opportunities. And while looking through those, I think I was on Facebook Marketplace, the car I purchased, well, not that exact car, but one like it popped up, and I started doing some research. On paper, it seemed like the perfect recipe for a cheap, fun sports car. It has the horsepower, it has the drop top, it has everything you kind of want. And it seems like not a very popular car, not a popular option, but on paper, it seems to make sense. So the more research I did, and I started digging around, and I found this one with the exact spec that I would want, minus the color, but we'll get to that. And I think so far I've had the car for about a month or so, and because of my limited storage, I bought it, put it in storage, and it sat there, and for the last couple of weeks I started driving it to get used to it. It sat for a couple of years before I purchased it, so there are some small issues that come from that by default. Without further ado, this is my Miata Contender alternative. Did you guess correctly? Probably not. This is a 2001 SLK 320. So it's the V6 model, it's not the 4-cylinder supercharged one, and it is a 6-speed manual. These are insanely difficult to find in a 6-speed manual because it's kind of a hairdresser's car, and most of them were all sold as automatics. And in its heyday, it was compared to the Boxster and a BMW Z3, and it held its own. So by default, it would seem like a good sports car. I did not want the 4-cylinder supercharged one because they're down on power, and even fully tuned, they pretty much make the horsepower this thing makes stock. It makes a good exhaust note and a good induction note, so it is engaging. And it is a hardtop convertible, which is my preferred option. I've never owned a convertible. I'm not huge on them, but the hardtop makes it look like a coupe when it's up, and when it's down, it's a normal convertible. Now, before you say I'm some kind of a Mercedes fanboy, I'm not. Like I said, when I was looking around for a sports car, this thing popped up. It never even crossed my mind beforehand to purchase SLK. It wasn't a car that was ever on my mind. I kind of like the way it looked. The front end is a little dated, but the rear end, I think, looks pretty aggressive to this day. And it just happened to pop up, and now I'm 3 Mercedes in. So wasn't really part of the plan, but the price you pay for this versus everything else is crazy. When I found this one, it was about 4 hours from me, and it was at the time the only 6-speed manual 320 for sale in the entire country. On Auto Tempest listed, I checked everywhere else, it was the only one. And it was listed by an older gentleman who was a second owner of the car and had sat for a couple of years, and he was just going to offload it. Now, all the cars that are in competition, like the Miata and the Z3, even Boxster, they all have gone up in value, but I'm assuming this gentleman couldn't find what the crazy inflated prices are nowadays. So I purchased that thing for $4,500. Now, he had it listed for $6,000, and it was a month-old listing, so we worked out a deal. He was willing to part with it for much less just to offload the car. And I don't think you could find anything for that price. I mean, even as it is, it's a pretty soft riding car. It's more of like a GT touring type car versus being a straight up sports or race car. But there is an aftermarket for it. It's not a very large aftermarket, so I'll have to get creative with things I do with the car. But it has the potential, and even if I was to dump $5,000 into it, I'd still only be just under $10,000 into the whole project, and that thing would destroy everything in its path in that price range. So let me give you a walk around on it. We'll go for a drive. I will tell you things I do like about it. I'll tell you things I don't like about it, because like any other car, especially car this size, there are its setbacks and its age. It's 21 years old at this point, but let's walk around it. So first things first, the wheels are not that great, and I know it's not the AMG version, but you can't get the SLK 32 AMG in a 6-speed manual, so, and they're way too much money nowadays. The wheels are not ideal, and the previous owner put some all-season tires, and they're all the same all around. The paint, actually, that's another thing I'll bring up. This car has been repainted. It had clear coat peel, no accidents, clean title, but it was repainted, and it's not the world's greatest paint job. I don't know if you could tell in the video, but there is some orange peel. I do have plans of wrapping the car because I am not huge on red cars. This is the third red car I've owned, and it's just not a color for me. And especially in this car, it looks a little bit too feminine, and I have a lot of plans in place to make it look a little bit less feminine. So definitely there's going to be a color change, wheel change, and a bunch of other aesthetic things. On the inside, as you can tell, it is a 6-speed manual with the third pedal, which is rare nowadays. And it does have 114,000 miles, but it is very clean inside. The seats and the seating position is questionable, only because I'm pretty tall. I'm over 6 feet tall. This is a pretty small car, but I still managed to fit. The one thing I did have to do is get this lumbar pillow, just because on long journeys it does get a little bit daunting to be sitting in kind of a slouch position. One thing I don't like that's gonna have to go is the wood trim. Not a fan of it. I'm probably gonna wrap it in carbon fiber. Same with this here, and on the doors. Overall, interior is in really good shape. It does have an aftermarket radio, a Kenwood unit. Sound system's not bad at all. It's got the USB thing and everything else. The one thing that sucks is these little buttons here to change your songs are very tiny, kind of hard to see. So you have to take your eyes off the road to change songs. So under the hood, as said, is the 3.2 M112 engine, and this engine has a pretty decent aftermarket on it. Most people probably don't know or don't realize that this car here, when it went out of production, the R170, and was replaced with the R171, the chassis and everything else, when it was discontinued by Mercedes, it went to Chrysler and became the Crossfire. And the Crossfire has a pretty good following on it, aftermarket following, so you could reuse a lot of the stuff. One thing that is very limited is aesthetically the aftermarket. So like headlights, grills, things like that, bumpers, lips are hard to come by for this car. So I will have to do some testing of eBay things, and it's probably been since my teens that I bought an aftermarket body accessory on eBay, so it will be a nice comparison to see what they're like nowadays. But back in the day, if you bought an eBay part, you were a ricer. One thing that the previous owner added, it's got a trickle charger here, so you could plug into it since the car did sit a lot. On my initial inspection, it did have some oil leaks from the valve cover, so I'll have to fix that. Also, while driving it, I did note that there is some slop in the driveline. I'll have to lift it up when we're done driving it and see what that's all about. I don't know if it's just a U-joint that's worn out or the flex disc or something like that, but it does need a little bit of TLC. Has a pretty spacious trunk. Don't mind all my camera equipment in there, but you have this flap here. If this is not set in place, the top won't open, but it's still got plenty of trunk space. I think if for like you and a passenger, you could easily go on a weekend trip away on it. Let's take her for a drive. Now, as I said, I've had this car for a little bit, so I've kind of driven it, well, for the last couple of weeks. I've driven it and I've gotten used to how it drives and how it is. It's nice and convenient to have a retractable top. Like I said, I've never had a convertible car. I had a Camaro SS that had T-tops, a 4th gen, but I've never had one of these. Now, as I stated, it does have a good induction note, so definitely with an intake, and from what I've read, these are pretty restricted with air, so like an intake actually does good for it. But the pickup and the torque on it, I'd say it's pretty good. It's a fun car to drive, and I think part of what makes it fun is the fact that it's got a 6-speed manual. Cars don't come with that anymore. It's a pretty rare thing, and people forget how much more engaging the car is when you have a 6-speed. In the automatic version of this car, it got a lot of crap for it for being automatic because it was just a slush box 5-speed, but the 6-speed definitely makes a difference. It's not as engaging of a transmission as you'd get in a Porsche or something like that. It's a little bit rubbery. It's very 90s Mercedes like, but I have a feeling I could probably get different shifter bushings or get ones made that are not rubber but get one that are aluminum, and it would probably feel a lot better. So that's one gripe I kind of have with the car. Another weird thing that I noticed on it, I'm not too sure if it's because of the tires that are on it, but it's really quick with the steering coming off center. So like you put in a small input and the car has like a tendency to dart right away, but then the rest of the steering feels normal. Now again, it's not like a Porsche type steering where it feels super engaging and whatnot, but it is not electronically assisted, so you do get a good amount of feedback where you wouldn't in a modern car nowadays with all the electronic assisted steering. Visibility on the car, whether top down or top up, is pretty good. I could see everything clearly. It's an easy car to drive, and it's a fun car to drive. It's pretty quick for what you get. It isn't no Speedmaster, but it definitely has way more poke than like a Miata, let's say. It doesn't feel much at all slower than like a Boxster S. It's right there in that same horsepower range, and it is got plenty of torque, and you can definitely tell that. I know that was a big complaint people always had on the supercharged ones, is it was a very lackluster engine. This one is a lot more engaging. It is a base C-Class engine in later years, but when you put it in a body that weighs a couple hundred pounds below 3,000, it definitely makes a difference. It's pretty quick, it's pretty fun. So far I like it, I'm enjoying it. Definitely with some suspension upgrades, most definitely with some tire upgrades. I think this thing has a lot of potential to be something that's really, really fun, and you can still take out and drop the top and go on a mountain drive. I did do a killer standing burnout with it, and it caused the throttle body, or the boot, the intake on the throttle body to pop off, and the car had a horrible misfire. I had a slew of something like 6 different codes that it threw for multiple misfires. Probably a motor mount thing. Motor mounts, like I said, it does feel like it's a little bit on the sloppier side of things. I think some stiffer motor mounts would do this car a lot of good. Same thing with the driveline stuff. It does feel a little bit like there's some slop, but again, it's a 21-year-old car and you can't expect it to be perfectly fine. Another gripe I kind of have with the car is the pedal placement. Heel and toe in this car is actually really difficult to do. Unless you're really standing on the brakes, it's difficult to roll your foot onto the gas and pull the throttle. So it's something I'm going to have to look into, if that's an option, to get, you know, some kind of a wider gas pedal or something like that to make heel and toe a little bit easier. Another thing that I also noted about it is the power steering pump has a tendency to be a little bit noisy. Probably just needs to be replaced. At least it sounds like power steering pump to me. I'll have to definitely look a little further into that. But alright, so we're back in the garage to do a full inspection on the newest purchase. And you might be asking yourself, Jake, why on earth would you buy another project car when you already have one here? And the answer to that is pretty simple. It's because I am a moron. And the opportunity presented itself, so why not? Now, I haven't had a good look at the car. Like I said, I bought it. I made the decision to buy it before we even left. I was like, we're doing this. And then drove out, bought it, drove it back, threw it in storage for a few weeks till I could get my hands back on it. So now let's dive a little deeper into the potential issues, plans, and everything else with it. All right, so as stated, to recap, this is the SLK 320 with the V6. It's a bone stock car. Nothing's been done to it. I am the 3rd owner now of the car. It sat for, I think, 2 or 3 years before I picked it up. The guy would just run it and kept it on a trickle charger. And some of those things have shown their ugly face. I drove it around a little bit. I drove it to work. Last weekend, the girlfriend and I went out and took it for a spin just to see how things are. And I decided to do a sick burnout with it because that's what you do. And when I did that, the car started misfiring like crazy, had a major loss of power. When I got it back over here, I found out that the intake, the boot itself, came off the throttle body through a slew of faults. I just wrote them down all for multiple misfires because it couldn't read the mass airflow mixture. But other than that, it's been good. There are things I do and I don't like about the car. Like I said, the headlights are like candlelight and I want to upgrade those. The original grille, I'm not a big fan of. I don't know why, maybe because it's gray. If it was black or something like that, but I want to change that out. That there's some slop in the driveline and not too sure what that is yet. We'll pick up the car here in a moment and take a look. The shifter feels a little spongy. I want to take a look at that, see what I could do with that. I do really want to get rid of that wood trim. I am not a wood trim type of guy. It's just not my style. Let me get this thing lifted up in the air. We'll take a look at all the brakes, the suspension, the driveline stuff, and find out what else I need to do. Okay, so we got it up in the air. I got it inspected. Here's some things that I noted. For one, the engine cover's off, but it's pretty obvious we have these valve cover leaks. And as far as I could see, that's probably the only oil leak we got. So I'll probably go on FCP Euro as usual and get some valve cover gaskets ordered. Other than that, everything else looks good. I have no free play in any of the tie rods or anything like that, and If you've been watching this channel, you already know my love for going back and forth with suspension. But I did notice a little bit of play in the bearing on the front right here. I'll probably address that when I install coilovers on the car. As mentioned when I was driving it, it will need a brake upgrade, and everything else on it's pretty solid. So as expected underneath, since it is a Southern car, it is clean and rust free. Like I stated, no issues noted with any of the suspension components aside from the front right bearing there having some free play. This oil right here that's built up on the trans, it looks like it's all just running down from those valve cover gaskets. And then, as I stated, there's some slop in the shifter, and I know it's hard to tell with the drive shaft in the way, but there's some slop there. You can tell there's some right here, and then down there where that bushing is. I am hoping I could just get some bushings made for down there and tighten that up a little bit so the shifter feels a little bit more crisp. And I'll probably have to pull the drive shaft down to do that, and I'll do that when I take care of the flex discs. Now this one up front here is fine. This one is relatively dry rotted and cracked, so I'll just go ahead and replace both, and then when I have the drive shaft down to do as such, I'll worry about the shifter bushings. Other than that, she's pretty solid all around. I honestly have no complaints. This car's very clean, very well taken care of. There's no exhaust leaks or any other issues that I could see down here right now. Overall, I think this is a pretty good buy. The really only things I have to address are the valve cover gaskets. The flex discs on the drive shaft are a little bit rubbery and worn out and dry rotted. At that same time, I'll worry about trying to make the shifter a little tighter and replace the rubber bushings with something more sturdy. This wheel bearing here, it has very little play. It's almost minimal. You can't tell it's there. I'll probably worry about that when I do anything with the suspension. I did find coilovers for it, so that will be the option, and I'll worry about that as well when I upgrade the wheels and tires. So overall, it's in good shape. Those are the only leaks. It runs well, but it could use a tune-up. I think it's a good starting point. I think this has the potential to be a wonderful alternative to Miata. As I stated, I do have plans to make it a little bit less of a hairdresser's car. You know, this front end does not inspire confidence, and the small wheels don't either. But overall, it's a solid car. I think it's a lot of fun to drive, and I'm looking forward to building it up and having some more fun with it. On that note, we'll leave it there. I have looked up, and I'm going to order some parts for this thing. We'll pick up from there. In the meantime, I'm kind of at a stalemate with the 190E till I find an engine and trans. That's an ongoing project. I'll try to update throughout. This is more current and more fun, and the car drives as it is, so these will be little minuscule things I have to do on it. But stay tuned. I have much more to give on this thing and the 190E, events with the C63 and everything else. So make sure to subscribe, comment, like, and we'll pick up with this thing next week. Thanks for watching.